Well, it sounded to a lot of these allies of the United States like they were being described as adversaries or autocrats. It was really the focus here, two things. One of them was migration, and the second was what Vice President Vance calls censorship. He was trying to bring that MAGA message of the enemy within to the global stage. And specifically, he says that European leaders aren't showing that they have strong democracies when they sideline controversial groups. He went out of his way to meet with the head of the AfD. That's a political party that's under investigation in Germany because it's so far right and for potentially conducting extremism. And he mentioned that car ramming in Munich recently conducted by an Afghan migrant as an example of what he says is out of control migration. He says that's proof you've got to bring immigration skeptics into the government.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about J.D. Vance lecturing Europe, telling them that they have lost their way in regards to the values, Western values that they used to believe in, right? Like, for example, they don't really believe in freedom of speech anymore. Christianity isn't that influential anymore in Europe. They're pro-mass migration. And on top of that, they become just straight up authoritarian, right? And J.D. Vance told our counterparts in Europe the truth, right? The truth about who they are, how the white man is fallen, okay? This is the first time ever that the mainstream liberal media and the Democrats were upset about somebody lecturing the white man, right? I mean, usually they're okay with that. They're okay with that. But in this case, they're not okay with it, right? They're upset that J.D. Vance told the leaders of Europe the truth about how the West has fallen, right? Mainly thanks to a decline in Western values in order to push a globalist agenda. And let's just say that the leaders of Europe aren't really handling J.D. Vance's speech well, especially due to the fact that J.D. Vance was there to talk about Russia and Ukraine and a possible peace settlement. But it doesn't look like things are going the way that the European leaders were hoping it would.
Points that everybody here is buzzing about is Vice President Vance's speech to the Munich Security Conference. It was so sharp and strident in its criticism of European failure, in his words, to live up to their democratic ideals. He at one point referred to Europeans as commissars, claimed that they were throttling the free speech rights of Europeans. Not at all what the people here were expecting from an American vice president. I heard some people compare it to the speech that Vladimir Putin made back in 2007, very strident declaration of Russia's interest, assertion of a new role in the world. Some people heard Vance's speech here in that same way, as a challenge to Europe, and one that was, for some Europeans, quite upsetting.
It's an absolutely striking parallel that you're drawing there, and one that comes as Europe is asking for a seat at the table here in this pre-negotiation phase. I wonder if you can talk about that, and then also the baggage that Vance himself, from his days in the Senate, brings to these conversations with the Ukrainians. He was no such fan of continued aid to the country.
So, Ali, Europeans are frightened by Vladimir Putin. They see a big, threatening army to their east. They see Ukraine valiantly standing up to Putin, and they're worried about the future. They're worried that if the United States abandons them to Russia, that they simply don't have the firepower to enforce a durable peace. So I heard today from a number of Europeans on stage and off concern about, is America still really ready to back us up if we go into peace negotiations? Is America going to be there as a guarantor? I think there's a feeling that this war is in a stalemate, that it's gone on for a terrible, bloody 3 years. I don't hear anybody saying it's not time for negotiations to see if you can get a settlement. But again and again, Europeans say if it's not a just settlement, it won't last, and it certainly won't protect the security of Europe.
Yeah, so the Europeans are concerned, including Ukraine, about the United States basically saying, we don't need you to be a part of the negotiations, okay? Us and Russia, we're going to go to the negotiating table and we're going to tell you guys what it's going to be, right? And that's it. They don't like that. Zelenskyy really doesn't like that. But they're concerned that, if the United States abandons NATO, then they won't be able to enforce peace, right? They won't have the firepower, which is funny because these are the same people that are so triggered by President Trump essentially asking Europe to, pull your own weight. Like, for example, increase the amount of GDP that you are contributing to defense, okay? All of these NATO countries, a lot of these NATO countries aren't living up to their commitments, right, for defense spending. They've been lagging behind, living high off the hog, spending their tax dollars or other things, right, that we don't even get here in the United States of America. They have universal health care. We don't, okay? But we have to spend all of our money, right, on the military to protect them, right? Again, while they benefit from not having to spend those tax dollars on their military, okay, because they think that we're going to protect them. So I don't understand why it's so controversial for the United States to, go and negotiate with Russia, since we're mainly the ones that would have to fight, okay, if things really got out of control, right? This is what the Europeans are expecting of us. But apparently this has triggered them so badly that they are now holding an emergency meeting about whether or not the United States is going to include them in these negotiation talks with Russia. Take a look.
American support.
This was Volodymyr Zelenskyy meeting the American Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Vice President Vance a couple of days ago, worried that the US is now unilaterally setting up peace talks with Russia. The Ukrainian leader adamant that his nation cannot be excluded from discussions about its own future.
I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. There is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us.
The idea of Trump and Putin forging closer ties troubles many. Among them, plenty of these European leaders, now about to hold a hastily arranged get-together in Paris, trying to make sense of this rapidly changing world order. At the forefront, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. Britain and France have always seen themselves as America's strongest allies in Europe, but both now pushing back against Washington, insistent that peace talks must include Ukraine.
We all desperately want the war to end. I think it's clear for that to be a durable peace, Ukraine has to be at the table, has to be part of that agreement. We believe Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership.
America doesn't agree, insisting that Ukraine should not join NATO, that European countries should spend more on defence, just as the US pulls away from the continent. And for some, that is a very worrying picture of the future. As Europe ponders its next step, Trump's team acts. Rubio has arrived in the Middle East. He's in Israel now, and he'll then go to Saudi Arabia to start the talks with Russia. It is divisive diplomacy hosted in a volatile...
Yeah, so you see, they heard that, okay? Zelenskyy and the European leaders are panicking because Trump and Putin have said, you can't sit at a big boys table, right? You're not invited to negotiations. I mean, come on now. I mean, do these people really think that Ukraine is going to join NATO, right? Really? Do they really think that Russia is going to accept that? I mean, yeah, there's just delusion here, okay? At the end of the day, a neutral Ukraine is probably the best outcome for everybody, right? That's probably the best outcome. But again, there's just some people who don't want to accept that. They just don't want to accept that. So, hey, if you don't want to accept it, then you can fight the war. If it's that big of a deal to you, then you should fight for it, right? You fight for it, okay? You go over there, you fight Russia, okay, on behalf of Ukraine so that they can join NATO. But America, we can stay out of it because, I mean, it's not that big of a threat to us, okay? It might be a big threat to Europe, which I understand, okay? And if that's the case, then you need to up your defense spending and you need to be ready to fight, right? Do what you got to do, which, apparently, the UK, Keir Starmer, he came out and indicated that they might actually be willing to fight for Ukraine.
What some people consider to be appeasement, what's happening right now in Ukraine. I see your face there, Caroline. I mean, whatever happens, if there is a peace deal, the Prime Minister has hinted that will mean that there might be British troops on the ground. See him talking exclusively to Robert Peston. Have a look.
Pete Hegseth, Defence Secretary, wants French and UK troops in Ukraine policing that peace. Are you open to that?
Well, I won't get into the particular capabilities, but I do accept that if there is peace, then there needs to be some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine, and the UK will play its part in that.
You know, our Defence Secretary makes clear that the military is, to say the least, underfunded. An ex-head of the Navy says that the military has been hollowed out. Even if there is a peace, how on earth are Britain going to provide the type of support when there just simply isn't the funding for the military?
The risk that Russia will occupy Europe is 100%.
If the United States pulls out of NATO,
Yes.
Russia will occupy Europe.
Yes, so not all the Europe. They will begin from those countries, as I said, who are big our friends, but small countries who've been in the USSR and the Soviet Union. They will begin and we'll see what will be the answer. But Europe will not answer because they don't have. They will begin to defend itself. Each country defend itself. And at this moment, so Russia will get all the successes with all the territories they will want. I don't know, they will want 30% of Europe, 50, I don't know, nobody knows. But they will have this possibility.
Yeah, I think President Trump has a whole lot of leverage over Europe when it comes to these negotiations, okay? I mean, they don't really have, they don't have the military power. They just don't. They haven't been spending money on the military, okay? They've been living off the United States of America. This is exactly what President Trump was talking about. Like, imagine you're terrified of Putin, but you have so much confidence in the United States that we're going to fight your war that you just decided, you know, we're not even going to spend the money on the military. We're going to just let the United States be our military. Yeah, that probably was not a good position to put yourself in as a country, right? We are allies, okay? But ultimately, you know, allies, sometimes they break up, right? Sometimes things happen, okay? You got to be prepared to defend yourself. But anyways, I think that things are going to work out, right? I don't think it's the end of NATO, okay? I don't think that the world is going to end. I think that there will be a peace deal, and, you know, we're going to go from there, okay? But with that being said, again, this is what the mainstream media doesn't like, and that leads me to this interview right here featuring Miss Margaret Brennan of Face the Nation. She is going to be interviewing the Secretary of State, Mr. Marco Rubio, and she's going to get triggered by J.D. Vance's speech to Europe, and Marco Rubio is going to set her straight. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
I want to ask you about what happened in Munich, Germany at the security conference. Vice President Vance gave a speech, and he told U.S. allies that the threat he worries about the most is not Russia. It is not China. He called it the threat from within, and he lectured about what he described as censorship, mainly focusing, though, on including more views from the right. He also met with the leader of a far-right party known as the AfD, which, as you know, is under investigation and monitoring by German intelligence because of extremism. What did all of this accomplish other than irritating our allies?
Well, why would our allies or anybody be irritated by free speech and by someone giving their opinion? We are, after all, democracies. The Munich Security Conference is largely a conference of democracies in which one of the things that we cherish and value is the ability to speak freely and provide your opinions. And so I think if anyone's angry about his word, they don't have to agree with him, but to be angry about it, I think actually makes his point. I thought it was actually a pretty historic speech, whether you agree with him or not. I think the valid points he's making to Europe is we are concerned that the true values that we share, the values that bind us together with Europe, are things like free speech and democracy and our shared history in winning 2 world wars and defeating Soviet communism and the like. These are the values that we shared in common. And in that Cold War, we fought against things like censorship and oppression and so forth. And when you see backsliding and you raise that, that's a very valid concern. We can't tell them how to run their countries. He simply expressed in a speech his view of it, which a lot of people frankly share. And I thought he said a lot of things in that speech that needed to be said. And honestly, I don't know why anybody would be upset about it. People are allowed, you know, you don't have to agree with someone's speech. I happen to agree with a lot of what he said, but you don't have to agree with someone's speech to at least appreciate the fact they have a right to say it, and that you should listen to it and see whether those criticisms are valid. I assure you, the United States has come under withering criticism on many occasions from many leaders in Europe, and we don't go around throwing temper tantrums about it.
Well, yeah, well, they're upset because is true, right? What JD Vance said was true, okay? It's like telling your best friend, hey, you're an alcoholic, right? You're a druggie, okay? You're a bum, right? You're a bum. You need to feed yourself. You need to take care of yourself. Go get a job, right? You got to take care of yourself. You got to stop living off me. That's essentially the message when it comes to defense spending. But when it comes to Europe and the decline of Western values, hey, it's like telling your friend that you've changed. You've changed. Telling your wife you've changed, right? You're not who you used to be when we got married, right? When we first met. You're not the same person. You have changed, okay? And those type of conversations are never comfortable conversations, right? So again, this is why they're upset. They're upset because what JD Vance said struck a nerve, right? They felt it in their soul, okay? Everybody knows it's true. They know it's true.
He was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And
wow. Again, listen to this propaganda, right? This is next level propaganda. JD Vance was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. So what she's saying is that JD Vance was in Germany where they weaponized free speech, according to this so-called journalist, to do the Holocaust, right? That is what this woman is saying, right? That is what she's saying. When that is not the way that it went down, right? Nazi Germany was very pro-censorship, right? Censorship is how an authoritarian regime like Hitler's Nazi Germany gains and retains power, okay? Which, again, is why JD Vance was talking about the importance of free speech, okay? Because Europe is headed in a direction that some people will argue they are using tactics that, are very authoritarian, okay? So, it's funny how she tries to frame this as free speech is the problem, right? Free speech is the issue. That's what caused the Holocaust, free speech. This is a fireable offense. Let's be real. Like, this is something that in a normal country, a journalist would be fired for saying something like this.
he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history. I also think it's wrong. Again, I go back to the point of his speech. Okay, the point of his speech was basically that there is an erosion in free speech and intolerance for opposing points of view within Europe, and that's of concern because that is eroding. That's not an erosion of your military capabilities. That's not an erosion of your economic standing. That's an erosion of the actual values that bind us together in this transatlantic union that everybody talks about. And I think allies and friends and partners that have worked together now for 80 years should be able to speak frankly to one another in open forums. Without being offended, insulted, or upset. And I spoke to foreign ministers from multiple countries throughout Europe. Many of them probably didn't like the speech or didn't agree with it, but they were continuing to engage with us on all sorts of issues that unite us. So again, at the end of the day, I think that people give that is a forum in which you're supposed to be inviting people to give speeches, not basically a chorus where everyone is saying the exact same thing. That's not always going to be the case when it's a collection of democracies where leaders have the right and the privilege to speak their minds in forums such as these.
Mr. Secretary, I'm told that we are out of time. A lot to get through with you. We appreciate you making time today.
Yeah, she definitely shut off the interview after that. See, here's the thing. They don't believe in that, Secretary Rubio. They don't believe in free speech, right? She just told you free speech leads to Holocaust, genocide, right? So, of course, they can't grasp the idea of JD Vance going in there and telling these European leaders something they don't want to hear, right? Or something different outside of what they normally hear because they don't believe in that, right? It's unheard of. This is why they're so shocked, right? This is why they're so upset and butthurt about it, right? But again, just the fact that you have a so-called journalist on air basically saying that free speech leads to the Holocaust, it tells you how authoritarian our country and, the West has become, right? Again, just closed-minded, extremely closed-minded to any ideas outside of what's in their bubble, right? Their globalist bubble, okay? So, that was a good job by Marco Rubio. I think Trump made a great pick with Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. I know a lot of people were questioning that pick, but ultimately, I mean, the guy knows his international politics, and I think that he's doing a good job. And I got faith in the guy, right? I like the way he's dealt with Latin America. I like the way he's dealing with Europe. I mean, the dude is professional as hell, and he knows his stuff, right? He's doing his thing. So credit what credit is due. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.